Imagine being served just $1.08 worth of food a day. In 2015, a sheriff in Alabama pocketed $750,000 in excess meal funds, while inmates in the same county jail suffered from constant hunger. This is the grim reality of prison meals in America, where the fight for food is as real as the fight for freedom. Stay with us as we explore one of the most disturbing scandals in America's prison system. Don't forget to like and subscribe to uncover the shocking truths of how some states feed their inmates on pennies a day. The truth behind America's prison food system is a dark and dirty secret, one that many want to keep hidden behind high walls and locked gates. While most of the public assumes that inmates in county jails and state prisons are receiving meals that meet basic nutritional standards, the reality is far from that. Investigations have shown a shocking disparity between what is promised and what is actually served. At times, these prisons and jails operate on food budgets so meager that basic survival is a daily struggle for the men and women locked behind bars. And when these facilities prioritize profit over people, it's the inmates who pay the ultimate price. The most disturbing case came from Alabama, a state notorious for cutting corners in its prison system. In 2015, the sheriff of a county jail was exposed for pocketing $750,000 in excess meal funds. The scandal revealed that the county was paying $1.08 per inmate per day for food, an amount that is barely enough to cover a fast food burger, let alone provide for a nutritious, sustaining meal. The sheriff, who was supposed to ensure proper care for those in his custody, instead took advantage of the system, funneling money meant for inmate meals into his own pockets. With the money he saved, the sheriff even bought himself a beach house, sparking public outrage. But the story doesn't stop there. The inmates, who were supposed to be receiving basic sustenance to survive, reported a constant feeling of hunger. The daily meals they were served were hardly enough to keep them going, let alone nourish their bodies. Instead of hearty, balanced meals, prisoners were often fed cold sandwiches, instant grits and sugary drink powders, far from what is considered a nutritious or balanced diet. It was a diet that left them weak, malnourished, and struggling to focus on the tasks at hand, let alone rehabilitate themselves. This kind of budget cutting is not unique to Alabama. Across the country, prisons and jails are increasingly turning to cost-saving measures that severely compromise the health and well-being of those incarcerated. When states spend under $3 per inmate per day on food, the results are predictable. Inmates suffer from chronic hunger, dramatic weight loss, and the psychological toll of being deprived of proper nutrition. Nutrition experts have long warned that such diets are not only harmful, but also dangerous. The average adult needs at least 2,000 to 2,500 calories per day to maintain a healthy weight and energy levels. Yet, for many prisoners, these basic requirements are rarely met. Meals often consist of processed, low-quality ingredients that fail to provide adequate vitamins, minerals, and proteins. Instead of fresh fruits and vegetables, inmates are given sugary drink mixes and starch-heavy dishes, nothing close to what is needed to fuel a healthy body and mind. And it's not just about the food itself. Inadequate meals also have far-reaching effects on the mental health of prisoners. Chronic hunger can lead to depression, anxiety, and other psychological issues. It strips individuals of their dignity and makes them feel as if their worth is equivalent to the low-quality food they are served. The combination of physical and psychological stress creates an environment where rehabilitation is nearly impossible. The individuals trapped in this cycle of hunger and deprivation are often left with little hope of successfully re-entering society. As more investigations reveal the underbelly of the American prison food system, one question continues to linger: how can a system built on justice justify such neglect? If the government truly views these individuals as human beings deserving of basic rights and dignity, how can it condone a system that reduces their sustenance to less than $1 a day? The issue is not just a matter of economics. It's a moral question. How can we, as a society, continue to turn a blind eye to the suffering of those incarcerated? Is saving a few dollars at the expense of human health and dignity truly worth it? These questions are at the heart of the debate surrounding prison food in America. But as the people behind bars continue to suffer in silence, the rest of us remain ignorant, blissfully unaware of the horrors that unfold behind closed doors. But there is hope. Across the country, advocates and organizations like the Marshall Project are working tirelessly to expose these injustices and bring about change. By shining a light on the flawed food systems in our prisons, they hope to spark a broader conversation about the treatment of inmates and push for reform. While the road ahead is long and difficult, change is possible, and it starts with each of us understanding the truth about what's really happening behind the walls of America's prisons. The scandal that shocked Alabama began in Etowah County, a small rural county whose jail population rarely made national headlines. But when reporters uncovered that Sheriff Todd Entrikin had personally pocketed more than $750,000 from inmate food funds, the public's disbelief turned into outrage. What's more shocking? He didn't break the law. Under an old Alabama statute dating back to the Great Depression, sheriffs were allowed to personally keep any leftover money from the state funds allocated to feed inmates, so long as they managed to provide meals. The law was intended to encourage thrift in a time when county budgets were tight. But decades later, it had become a loophole big enough to drive a beach house through, literally. Entrikin's 2018 disclosure filings revealed the purchase of a $740,000 beach home in Orange Beach, Alabama. While he was enjoying Gulf Coast sunsets, inmates under his custody were reporting meager rations and rotten food. Some said they were served sandwiches made with 2 slices of white bread and a smear of cold grits, or spoiled meat that caused stomach cramps and vomiting. When confronted, Entrikin defended his actions, claiming he followed the law. And he was right, technically. The statute, codified decades earlier, made no distinction between county funds and personal profit. The public outcry that followed forced state lawmakers to finally confront what critics had long called legalized theft. Behind the headlines, however, the scandal revealed a deeper truth about the U.S. jail system. Food is power. In many jails, the sheriff controls both the menu and the money. The smaller the food budget, the greater the personal gain. In Etowah County, several former inmates described how hunger shaped their days. Breakfast often consisted of little more than a few spoonfuls of oatmeal and a powdered drink mix. Lunch could be a bologna sandwich or a single hot dog without sides. Dinner, if served warm, was often a thin soup with more water than substance. "I lost 30 pounds in 3 months," said one former inmate. "I used to trade my shoes for extra food trays." Inmates found creative ways to survive. Some sold drawings, cleaned cells, or even traded favors for extra scoops of instant potatoes. The commissary, run by private vendors, offered instant noodles and candy bars, but prices were inflated. To eat enough, inmates needed money on their books, which many didn't have. Meanwhile, local taxpayers assumed their money was feeding prisoners adequately. They didn't realize that much of the budget was being siphoned off. This pattern wasn't unique to Alabama. Similar excess meal fund schemes had existed in other counties across the South for years. In one shocking case, a sheriff in Morgan County, Alabama, fed inmates dog-grade meat purchased from a local supplier. The county's health department later discovered that the meat was marked, "not for human consumption." The sheriff was briefly removed, but the law that allowed him to keep leftover funds stayed in place. Nutritionists who studied the meals served in such jails found they contained barely 1,200 calories per day, half of what an adult male requires. The result was widespread malnutrition, fatigue, and weakened immune systems. Some inmates became so desperate that they ate toothpaste or instant drink powder just to feel full. Advocates called it a humanitarian crisis hiding in plain sight. "The state is saving pennies at the cost of human suffering," said one investigator with the Marshall Project, whose exposé on the issue helped spark legislative change. Eventually, Alabama passed a bill requiring inmate meal funds to be placed in separate, auditable accounts, banning sheriffs from pocketing the money. But for the men and women who lived through those years of hunger, justice came too late. Behind every headline about corruption lies an invisible population that pays the price. For those inmates, a sandwich wasn't just a meal, it was a measure of how much society believed they deserved. When public outrage finally forced counties to stop letting sheriffs pocket meal funds, a new solution emerged, one that promised efficiency, accountability, and cost savings. But in practice, it only deepened the crisis. Enter the private prison food contractors. Corporations that feed hundreds of thousands of inmates every day across America, often undercutting each other in a race to the bottom. By the mid-2000s, companies like Aramark Correctional Services, Trinity Services Group, and ABL Management had become dominant players in the prison food industry. State corrections departments, eager to save money and avoid scandals, signed multi-million-dollar contracts with these firms. The goal was simple: outsource the responsibility of feeding inmates to professionals who could do it cheaper and better. But the reality was far from ideal. Investigations by the Marshall Project, the Detroit Free Press, and the New York Times found a disturbing pattern. Cost savings were achieved at the expense of quality, nutrition, and safety. Former kitchen workers and inmates described spoiled meat, moldy bread, and rodent infestations in kitchens. In some facilities, food was prepared hours in advance and left at unsafe temperatures before being served. In Michigan, where Aramark managed meals for more than 40,000 inmates, the situation turned chaotic. Reports surfaced of maggots found in food trays, undercooked meat, and shortages so severe that some inmates simply went without meals. The Michigan Department of Corrections eventually fined the company and terminated its $145 million contract, but not before thousands of inmates had been fed unsafe food for years. The same story played out in Ohio, Florida, and Georgia. The pattern was clear: the lower the bid, the worse the food. And because state contracts rewarded vendors who could operate on razor-thin budgets, the incentive to cut corners was baked into the system. Nutritionists and prison reform advocates warned that these cost-cutting practices not only undermined health but also fueled unrest. When food becomes a weapon of control, tension spreads fast. Inmates have staged hunger strikes, riots, and protests over inedible meals. One Michigan inmate told reporters, "We get slop that even a dog would reject. It's not food, it's punishment." But perhaps the most troubling aspect of privatization was the lack of oversight. Once states handed over the contracts, they often failed to monitor whether meals met nutritional or sanitary standards. Inspections were infrequent, and whistleblowers risked losing their jobs. Even when violations were found, fines were small compared to the profits these companies made. For corporations like Aramark and Trinity, prison food was a lucrative business. The margins came not from improving quality but from shaving pennies off every tray, reducing portion sizes, substituting cheaper ingredients, and paying low wages to kitchen staff. Many inmates themselves were forced to work in the kitchens for as little as 13 to 23 cents an hour, preparing the very meals they were forced to eat. Inside the cells, the consequences were visible. Inmates grew gaunt and pale. Reports of vitamin deficiencies, fatigue, and stomach illnesses became common. Some lost 20 or 30 pounds in a few months. "I felt like my body was disappearing," one former Florida inmate said. Every day was about trying to survive the hunger. Even correctional officers noticed the impact. Malnourished inmates were more irritable, aggressive, and prone to conflict. "You can't keep a man hungry and expect him to behave," one guard admitted. "It's like running a pressure cooker with no release valve." The problem wasn't limited to food alone. It reflected a broader issue within America's incarceration model: the commodification of punishment. Every meal, every bed, every soap bar became a business opportunity. And as private contractors competed to deliver cheaper solutions, humanity itself became negotiable. In many states, public pressure has forced policymakers to revisit these contracts. Some departments have returned food services to public management, citing improved quality and reduced inmate tension. Others, however, continue to renew contracts quietly, arguing that the system can't afford to change. But critics say the real cost isn't financial, it's moral. When a nation values efficiency over dignity, the result is predictable: the weakest pay the price. Hunger inside a prison is not like hunger on the outside. It's not a skipped lunch or a bad diet. It's a slow, grinding deprivation that gnaws at the mind and body every single day. Inside the walls, where control is absolute, food becomes both currency and weapon. And when that food disappears, or turns into something inedible, desperation takes over. Across the United States, inmates have reported losing up to 40 pounds in a matter of months. Their ribs push through their skin, their faces hollow out, and their energy fades. In extreme cases, malnutrition leads to fainting, stomach ulcers, and infections that go untreated. Prisoners describe the feeling as dying in slow motion. In Alabama's county jails, several inmates wrote letters to advocacy groups describing meals so small they were forced to drink water to fill their stomachs. Some mixed powdered drink mix into water just to suppress the hunger. Others tried to trade commissary items, if they had money, to get something extra to eat. But many had nothing. At one facility in Etowah County, an inmate named Marcus recalled receiving a cold sandwich with a slice of bologna, 2 crackers, and watered-down juice. That was lunch. Dinner was a scoop of grits and 1 hot dog. He said, "When you're locked up 23 hours a day, food becomes your only thing to look forward to, and when that food's gone, so is your sanity." Psychologists have confirmed what many inmates already know: prolonged hunger changes the mind. It makes people anxious, aggressive, and paranoid. Small arguments turn into fights, and minor slights spark violence. Correctional officers have admitted that mealtime unrest is one of the biggest causes of tension inside facilities. "When you feed grown men like dogs, they'll act like caged dogs," one officer in Georgia said. In 2016, at the Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama, several inmates refused to return to their cells after being served spoiled chicken. The protest quickly escalated into a riot that left one officer dead and another injured. Investigators later revealed that inmates had been complaining for months about food shortages, maggots in rice and sour milk. Hunger wasn't the only cause of the violence, but it was the spark. Elsewhere, inmates resorted to eating toothpaste, paper, or even soap to ease the pain of hunger. One man from Louisiana's Orleans Parish Prison told the Marshall Project, "When your stomach is empty, you'll eat anything. You'll even dream about food." Another said that after losing 25 pounds in 2 months, his vision blurred and his hands shook constantly. He described feeling lightheaded, dizzy, and angry all the time. But the tragedy of hunger in prison isn't just physical, it's psychological. Food deprivation strips away dignity, the last thing an inmate can claim as his own. "It's like they want to remind you you're nothing," said one former inmate. "You don't even deserve a full meal. You're not human, you're just a number on a tray count." Doctors who examined released prisoners often found evidence of malnutrition-related diseases, anemia, low blood sugar, and weakened immune systems. For those who already suffered from conditions like diabetes or hypertension, poor diets only made things worse. And because medical care inside prisons is often equally underfunded, many never received proper treatment. In some cases, starvation even led to death. In 2017, at the Milwaukee County Jail, a 38-year-old inmate named Terrell Thomas died of dehydration after being denied water for 7 days. His death made national headlines, but fewer people realized it was part of a broader pattern of neglect, cruelty, and systemic failure. The same system that underfed inmates often ignored their pleas for medical attention until it was too late. Experts say the roots of this crisis go deeper than food budgets. It's about control. Denying adequate nutrition isn't always a mistake, it's sometimes a method. A quiet punishment that leaves no bruises but destroys the will. Starvation has always been a tool of power, said Dr. Angela James, a criminologist at the University of Michigan. You can break a person without touching them, just by keeping them hungry. In some prisons, guards have used food as leverage. Inmates who disobey orders or file complaints are reportedly given smaller portions or meals served late. Those in solitary confinement often receive what's known as the loaf, a dense, tasteless block made from mashed vegetables, beans, and bread. It meets minimal calorie requirements but is designed to humiliate. Eating it feels like punishment itself. By 2020, lawsuits had piled up in several states over nutritionally inadequate and dangerous meals. Former prisoners described food laced with mold, bugs, and hair. Others reported being served meat labeled for animal consumption only. Some won settlements, but for most, justice never came. The cycle of hunger continued, quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. Even after release, the effects of that starvation linger. Many former inmates say they struggle with food anxiety, hoarding snacks, eating compulsively, or panicking when a meal is late. "When you've been hungry for years," one man said, "you never forget that feeling. Ever." As one prison reform advocate put it, hunger doesn't just happen in prisons, it's created there. And it's created by choices. The decision to save $1 instead of feeding a man, the decision to ignore suffering behind steel doors. Behind every cold sandwich and watered-down cup of grits, there's a balance sheet. What looks like neglect and mismanagement from the outside often turns out to be deliberate strategy, part of an intricate web of contracts, suppliers, and political deals that transform inmate hunger into corporate profit. The U.S. correctional food industry is worth over $4 billion annually, and much of that money flows to a handful of private corporations. Aramark, Trinity Services Group, and Keefe Group dominate this landscape, often bidding aggressively for long-term state contracts. On paper, these deals save taxpayers money. In practice, they create a business model where profit depends on how little an inmate eats. Each contract sets a per inmate per day rate, sometimes as low as $1.30 to $2.50. From that amount, the company must cover everything: ingredients, labor, transportation, storage, and management fees. The only way to make money is to cut costs, and the easiest target is the food itself. An internal whistleblower from Aramark once described the process bluntly: "The less we serve, the more we earn." He explained that kitchens were encouraged to stretch meals, using powdered eggs instead of fresh, fillers like soy protein in meat, and mixing outdated leftovers into soups. These weren't rare exceptions. They were part of standard operations designed to maximize margins. For state officials, outsourcing food services became politically convenient. It shifted responsibility and blame away from the government. When inmates complained, prison administrators pointed to the contractor. When scandals broke, the companies claimed they were following the state's budget guidelines. It was a perfect circle of accountability with no exit. In states like Florida and Michigan, where Aramark and Trinity held major contracts, public records revealed extensive lobbying activity. These companies spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on campaign contributions, targeting state legislators and correctional officials who oversaw procurement. Some contracts were renewed despite serious violations, reports of maggot-infested kitchens, expired ingredients, and falsified temperature logs. Fines were issued but rarely enforced. This pattern of revolving contracts blurred the line between cost savings and corruption. The same officials who signed food contracts often went on to work for the very companies they once regulated. The incentives were clear: keep costs low, keep your political allies happy, and keep the headlines quiet. Meanwhile, private food vendors didn't just feed inmates, they sold to them. Through commissaries, companies like Keefe Group and Access Secure Pack sold overpriced snacks, instant noodles, and drinks to supplement the inadequate meals. A pack of ramen that costs 25 cents outside could sell for $1.25 inside. For inmates earning cents per hour, it was exploitation disguised as convenience. But with hunger gnawing at them, they had no choice. The profit chain extended beyond the prison walls. Parent corporations of these food service companies are often linked to global conglomerates that also supply school cafeterias, corporate campuses, and sports arenas. The same brands feeding undernourished inmates are serving executives in glass towers, a striking reminder of how inequality operates even through something as basic as food. Even more disturbing is how private equity has entered the prison food market. Investment firms have begun buying up correctional service providers, bundling them into large portfolios. For investors, it's a stable business with guaranteed demand. After all, incarceration in America rarely declines. The logic is chilling. The more people behind bars, the more meals served, and the more profit made. Experts warn that this dynamic creates a perverse economic incentive. Companies lobby for stricter sentencing laws and longer prison terms, directly benefiting from mass incarceration. When you tie profit to punishment, said investigative journalist Shane Bauer, you create a system where human suffering becomes a commodity. Despite numerous exposés, real reform remains slow. Transparency is limited because most food service contracts are shielded by trade secrets clauses, preventing the public from knowing what's actually being served or how much it costs. Even nutritional standards, when included, are vague and easily manipulated. A meal labeled as meat may legally contain less than 20% actual meat content. Some states have started to push back. In 2019, California banned private prison contracts, citing human rights concerns, and began reviewing its food service operations. In Minnesota, local activists successfully pressured the Department of Corrections to terminate a private contract and bring food production back under state control. Early results showed improved meal quality and fewer inmate grievances, without significant cost increases. But for most of the country, the machinery of profit-driven hunger continues to turn quietly. Every bean, every slice of bread, every calorie shaved from a tray represents someone's bonus, someone's quarterly growth target. Inmate hunger has become institutionalized, not because America can't afford to feed its prisoners, but because it chooses not to. The system prioritizes efficiency over humanity, balance sheets over stomachs. And for those trapped within it, the price of that decision is counted not in dollars but in suffering. Every scandal leaves a trail. In the prison food industry, that trail is buried under mountains of invoices, falsified temperature logs, and contracts marked confidential. But some people, insiders, auditors, and former employees, have dared to dig through the dirt. Their discoveries reveal just how deep the corruption goes, and how America's cheapest meals come at its highest moral cost. One of the first cracks in the system appeared in 2014, when a former Aramark kitchen worker in Ohio's Correctional Reception Center contacted local journalists. She described being ordered to serve moldy bread, rotten vegetables, and meat labeled, "not for human consumption." When she complained, her supervisor told her to cut off the bad parts and serve the rest. Shortly after she spoke out, she was fired. But the damage was done. Her testimony prompted a state audit that uncovered hundreds of food safety violations across multiple facilities. The audit revealed that Aramark had routinely underreported food shortages, falsified temperature readings, and billed the state for ingredients that were never delivered. In one shocking example, the company charged Ohio taxpayers for 50,000 pounds of chicken that auditors could not account for. When questioned, Aramark called it a clerical error. The state fined the company, but it kept the contract, until public outrage made it impossible to ignore. Whistleblowers like her were rare. Working inside a prison kitchen means living in silence. Employees are often threatened with termination, and inmates who speak out risk losing privileges or facing retaliation. Yet, despite the danger, a growing number began leaking documents, photos, and even videos. These images showed filthy prep tables, broken refrigerators, and food crawling with maggots. They were proof that the system was rotting from the inside out, literally. In 2017, investigative reporters from the Marshall Project and AL.com obtained internal expense records from Alabama's county jails. They revealed that some sheriffs had pocketed thousands of dollars a month by inflating inmate counts or skimming from food supply contracts. One sheriff deposited $95,000 in unused meal funds into his personal account while feeding prisoners sandwiches made of processed soy filler. Another signed invoices for mystery meat shipments that never arrived. The more auditors looked, the clearer the pattern became. The hunger inside prisons wasn't an accident, it was designed. Each missing shipment, each forged temperature sheet, each budget efficiency, was part of a profit-driven system where every calorie cut was money earned. In Georgia, internal memos leaked from Trinity Services Group showed management instructing staff to reduce portion sizes during budget overruns and to substitute cheaper starches for protein. In Louisiana, inspectors found that vendors were paid for 3 meals per day but often served only 2, saving millions annually. And in Florida, whistleblowers exposed fake menu lists, healthy-sounding items like fresh vegetables and grilled chicken that existed only on paper to satisfy contract requirements. Auditors also discovered that corruption reached higher than anyone imagined. Some prison officials received kickbacks from suppliers in exchange for signing long-term deals or ignoring violations. Others had relatives employed by the very companies they were supposed to regulate. One 2018 internal investigation in Michigan found that a corrections administrator had accepted free trips and gifts from a vendor while negotiating a renewal contract. The deal was worth $130 million. Despite the overwhelming evidence, prosecutions were rare. Most cases ended quietly with settlements or contract terminations. Corporations rebranded, relocated, and resumed business under new subsidiaries. The same players, different names. Still, not everyone stayed silent. Activists and non-profit organizations like the Southern Center for Human Rights and the Marshall Project continued to expose the truth through relentless reporting. They documented the link between underfunded food programs and increased violence, disease outbreaks, and mental health breakdowns among inmates. Their work forced some state legislatures to hold hearings, and in a few cases to pass reforms. But for most prisoners, little has changed. In 2025, some states still allocate less than $3 per inmate per day for food. In parts of the South, the number remains closer to $1.50. The menus haven't improved, and the same corporations still win contracts through political connections rather than performance. Behind every statistic lies a human story: a man eating bread with mold, a woman drinking sugar water for dinner, a teenager learning that hunger is part of his punishment. These stories rarely make headlines, but they define the hidden cost of mass incarceration. Whistleblowers risk their jobs, reputations, and sometimes their safety to expose these truths. Their courage has forced America to look in the mirror, to confront what it means to call itself a just nation while starving the people it locks away. This story isn't just about food. It's about values. About how a nation that prides itself on justice can justify hunger as policy. The next time you hear about budget cuts or efficiency, remember what those words mean behind bars. Someone goes hungry so another can profit. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, help us expose them. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it so more people understand what's happening behind the walls. Because until the truth is seen, the silence continues to feed the system.